There was a paradox in the Mediterranean. The greatest empire of ancient history built immense fleets, hundreds of ships. Thousands of rowers went to Rome, which conquered continents, which built aqueducts and paved roads all over Europe. That same Rome lost naval battles, not to the enemy, but to the sea. In 255 BC, a storm destroyed almost 300 Roman ships in a single night. In 253 BC, the sea swallowed another 150 ships. In 249 BC, another catastrophic shipwreck. They weren't battles, they were mass drownings. Meanwhile, in the frozen north of Europe, a people without an empire, without degreed engineers, without academies on the eve, that people crossed the North Atlantic in wooden vessels and reached America 5 centuries before Columbus. If you've never heard this story honestly, it's because history was written by the victors. But the oceans hold memory, and those who learned to listen to them survived. If this type of knowledge makes sense to you, what civilization forgot and can still save, consider following this channel. What is here is not found in any school curriculum. Common sense has a simple explanation for Roman dominance: superior engineering. Rome was the advanced civilization. The Vikings were northern barbarians, savages with horns on their helmets. That image was fabricated, by the way, much later, by 19th century artists who never saw a real Viking helmet. The standard narrative says Rome dominated the seas because it had resources, organization, and technology. The Vikings were medieval exceptions. Historical curiosities, this narrative has a problem. It contradicts what the seabed knows. The Romans sank with a frequency that no professional maritime people could afford to accept. And the Vikings, who sailed in infinitely more violent seas, in latitudes where the wind doesn't ask permission, arrived where they wanted, when they wanted, and returned. The difference wasn't resources, wasn't size, it was philosophy. The Roman warship was a land combat machine adapted to float. The Romans were not sailors by nature. They were soldiers, and, when they needed a fleet, they did what they knew how to do. They turned the sea into solid ground. The Roman trireme was designed for straight-line speed, for charge, for collision. It had a bronze ram at the bow, the rostrum, made to pierce the enemy hull. It was heavy, rigid, low in the water, carrying a machine called the corvus, a bridge with a hook that grabbed the enemy ship and allowed boarding, turning naval combat into an infantry battle on water. It was brilliant for fighting other Roman ships or Mediterranean fleets of similar design. It was a catastrophe when the wind changed. The Roman ship didn't bend, didn't yield. When a big wave came, the rigid hull resisted and broke. The wood had nowhere to go. The structure was not made to converse with the sea. It was made to dominate the enemy, and the sea does not accept being dominated. The Viking longship was built on a completely different principle. It was not a floating fortress. It was an organism, and the Viking hull used a technique called clinker built in Norse. Ancient clinker built, the wooden planks overlapped slightly like scales. Each plank was fastened to the previous one with iron rivets, but with calculated space for movement. The entire hull could twist, flex, and adapt when a wave pushed the left side of the ship. The hull yielded in the right direction, and the vessel absorbed the impact instead of resisting it. There is a record of a Norwegian archaeologist who, in the 20th century, examined a recovered longship, and he described how the hull still showed signs of elasticity after more than 1,000 years buried in mud. The sea was not an enemy for the Vikings, it was the terrain. But the hull was only the first layer of the system. The keel was extraordinarily shallow. A longship 20 meters long could sail in less than a meter of water. This was no accident. It was deliberate. It meant that the same ship that crossed the Atlantic could be rowed upriver into enemy territory, landing warriors hundreds of kilometers inland. From the sea, it meant that in case of a coastal storm, the ship could be beached in seconds, instead of trying to find a harbor. The Vikings did not expect the sea to behave. They built a vessel that could respond to the sea in real time. The Viking square sail was controlled with a precision that surprises modern engineers. The sail was combined with between 14 and 32 oars, depending on the size of the vessel. The ship could be propelled even without wind, and maneuvered even in conditions that would leave a Roman ship motionless or broken. There was yet another detail that textbooks rarely mention. The Viking ship was often transported over land. This seems absurd until you understand the weight. An average longship weighed between 6 and 10 tons, light enough to be dragged by its own crew for kilometers on logs used as rollers. The Vikings crossed entire peninsulas this way, avoiding dangerous routes or simply opening new paths where the map did not yet exist. The comparison with Rome goes beyond wood and iron. Rome trained rowers like machines. The synchrony of the trireme depended on hundreds of men making exactly the same movement at the same time, like a human assembly line. When the rhythm broke, the ship lost power, and when the sea became rough, the rhythm invariably broke. The Vikings trained sailors. There was a huge philosophical difference. There the Roman oarsman was a part. The Viking sailor was an agent. He understood the wind, read the waves, knew when to change direction. Before the captain could order, the Norse sagas are full of descriptions of navigation that depend on reading stars, watercolor, bird behavior, smell of the air. There was no GPS, there was attention. There were decades of knowledge passed from father to son, from elder to youth, on real voyages in real seas. Leif Erikson did not reach North America because he had a better map than others. He arrived. Because the Viking navigation system, the ships, the men, the embodied knowledge was capable of surviving the unknown. Rome was sinking for a reason that no engineering could solve. She did not believe the sea could defeat her. Roman pride was functional on land, in open battle, against enemies who fought by the rules that Rome established. That pride was a weapon. At sea, it was extra weight in the hold. When General Publius Claudius Pulcher consulted the auguries before the Battle of Drepana in 249 BC, and the sacred chickens refused to eat a bad omen, he threw the chickens into the sea, saying that if they didn't want to eat, then they should drink. He went into battle and lost 93 ships. The anecdote may be apocryphal. The pattern it represents is not, Rome treated the sea as it treated the peoples it conquered, as something that should bow. The Vikings knew that the sea does not bow, so they learned to bend along with it. There was in northern Norway a shipbuilding tradition that archaeologists call the lapstrake tradition. The same clinker hull base, which may have origins predating the Viking era. For centuries, excavations in southern Scandinavia have found vessels dated to 300 AD with structural features that already anticipated the classic drakkar. This knowledge did not come out of nowhere. It was accumulated by generations of anonymous builders who tested, broke, remade, and tested again, not in theoretical simulations, but in seas that killed those who got it wrong. It was a ship that, according to modern tests with navigable replicas, could reach 15 knots in favorable conditions, faster than many modern leisure sailboats. It could cross the North Atlantic without finding a port. It could reach the Volga River, the Mediterranean, the coast of Canada, and could, when necessary, be carried on shoulders. There is something this whole story makes impossible to ignore. Rome, which built insurmountable borders, was sinking. On the borders that the sea established, the Nordic people, who had no word for impossible, reached every horizon the sea offered. The difference was not intelligence, not courage. It was the willingness to learn from what cannot be controlled. We live in cities that promise to protect us from the weather. We buy food without knowing where it comes from. We depend on systems we never test to see if they break, and when they break in great storms. In power outages, in crises that arise without warning, we discover that we have forgotten questions that our ancestors answered before turning 15. The Vikings were not stronger than us. They simply never stopped asking what the sea was trying to teach. If that kind of question resonates with you, this channel will keep asking those questions one at a time, one video at a time. You know what to do to not miss any of them. And the question that remains is this: when was the last time you trusted something you built with your own hands, instead of something that can be turned off by another person?